What's up, boopers? I got caught up a little bit in the classic World of Warcraft hype, so I've spent the last few months working on a 1 to 60 Alliance leveling guide. So here it is. This guide managed to get an Alliance warrior to level 60 in 5 days, 54 minutes played. But before we jump into the guide, we've got a lot of ground to cover. Firstly, for those of you new here or unfamiliar with me, here's a short introduction in 1 frame or less. Next, while this guide is based off of my memories of old vanilla guides, old thoughtbot entries, and private servers, some information may be off. Therefore, the guide is in a beta state, and I will correct any and all discrepancies once I have access to Classic. But I can assure you, roughly 95% of the leveling experience is fairly accurate to what we can expect in Classic. Now, for using this guide, it was designed to be used by pausing between instructions. For example, I'll say kill 12 gnolls, they spawn over here, watch out for their frostbolts. Then I'll go quiet so that you can pause it and then unpause it once you've done the task and continue with the guide. There will be a link in the description for a text version, but it's not completely up to date or nearly as detailed. Also keep in mind that this is a leveling guide, not a speed leveling guide. If you want a speed leveling guide, you should just be playing a hunter. But this is designed around the worst leveling class or leveling as a group, so though we do go fast, it's not completely optimized solely for speed. I think of speed leveling as like a one night stand. You just go in, you get laid, and then you peace out. This leveling guide is more like taking WoW out on a date first, getting to know her over a cup of coffee, then you go in for the long-term commitment. What I mean is that we will have 4 professions at 300, tons of rep, multiple attunements and keys done or in progress, and all the flight paths, etc. by the time we hit 60. You could easily optimize the run a bit to suit a speed run by simply removing professions and dungeons, or just play better than me and you can shave off about 5 hours. I think I had like 80 deaths, but unfortunately I don't have enough time to do a cleaner run, so here we are. So let's go into the more detailed questions you may have about the guide. Number 1, why use a leveling guide? Leveling in Classic is about the journey, right? And yeah, that's right, but this guide is about efficiency. You can still take your time to PvP and run dungeons and have fun and be slower than this guide, but I still recommend following it as a framework, as otherwise most of the time you waste leveling will just be traveling around back and forth and not knowing where to go. Let's look at Swamp of Sorrows, for example. For Alliance, the quests are ranged 35 to 40. Swamp of Sorrows itself has 1 quest chain and 3 other quests scattered throughout its zone. This one's an escort, and this one is a drop off of a named mob that you are otherwise not told to kill. If you just went to Swamp of Sorrows at 35, you'd get barely any experience and end up grinding or traveling elsewhere very quickly. However, thanks to this guide, you'll know that there's a Swamp of Sorrows quest that starts here from a scroll in a ship in Stranglethorn Vale. There's also a quest chain from Searing Gorge that takes you to Swamp of Sorrows. There's 2 quests from Stormwind that go to Swamp of Sorrows, a 3rd quest chain that starts in Stormwind that sends you to Dustwallow, then sends you back to Swamp of Sorrows, then there's a quest chain from the Shimmering Flats that eventually leads to Swamp of Sorrows, and there's also a chain from Desolus that leads to Swamp of Sorrows. Now people may complain there's not enough quests in Classic WoW, but it's actually a matter of weaving the quests into your path so that you can collect them all up and then visit Swamp of Sorrows once, and then instead of having only 3 quests, you've suddenly got 8, 9, or 10, and you're gaining a whole level from it. And that was just one of many examples. This guide will help you handle these cases for each zone as we get to 60. Number 2, 5 days and 1 hour. Is that even really fast? Well, yeah, for warriors it's hella fast, especially if you consider that we leveled 4 professions to 300 at the same time. You could improve my time. I died a lot and did this run on a non-fresh PvP server, meaning I got killed by level 60 horde a lot. That won't happen if you play on a PvE or at a fresh start. Hunters of course level faster, they don't need the gear upgrades like warriors do, and they have movement speed benefits as do druids. The reason I chose warrior for this guide is that you can follow it as any class and do it. Better than the warrior even if you're not a warrior. As for the world record, we came pretty close to beating it, but you've probably seen Varrock WoW hitting 60 in almost 3 days as the journey at the launch of some famous private servers. If you compare my run to Varrock WoW runs, for example though, you'll notice that we both hit level 30 around 24 hours played. Then suddenly, between 30 to 60, mine is done in 4 days, but these guys do it in 2 days. So why is there such a huge discrepancy? The explanation is pretty simple. Private servers were initially reverse engineered from the Wrath of the Lich King client, and Wrath of the Lich King had reduced the time from leveling from 30 to 60 by roughly 40% by boosting quest experience in many areas. This can easily be confirmed by comparing quest turn-ins from Varrock WoW's videos to Joanna's videos. Since then, most private servers have tried to rectify this, but none have the exact numbers. So it's very probable that you may level slower on Classic launch than I do in this guide, but don't compare yourself to the unrealistic private servers numbers, just relax, have fun, and try to be efficient. Don't worry about staring at your XP per hour bar. Question 3, you might ask, why the professions? Don't they slow you down? Well, first aid is a no-brainer. Bandages are huge in reducing your downtime as a warrior and most classes, and you barely have to go out of your way to level it. Cooking is mainly used for extra stamina and spirit, and believe it or not, cooking is your main source of income in this guide for us to get our level 40 mount. Many people will tell you that farming tigers and jaguars are great for their trash drops, but what they don't tell you is that tiger meat, normally vendored at about 87 copper, can be cooked into jungle stew. One tiger meat turns into 2 jungle stew, and each jungle stew vendors for 3 silver. This means that tiger meat, a nearly 60 to 80% drop rate item from tigers, sells for 60 silver a stack, in addition to the other trash drops these mobs drop. In addition, cooking gives us a buttload of quests and makes it so that we don't have to buy food as often, and we barely gotta go out of the way to level it. Herbalism, we are taking to level alchemy, and I'll be honest, herbalism sucks. At the early levels, it slows you down a lot until you get above 100 herbalism. But the benefits of having alchemy are just too great, especially for a warrior if you're leveling by yourself at a server launch, and especially if it's a PvP server. Now, I will admit that herbs on private servers spawned a little bit too abundantly, but given that most of the other bugs on the private servers worked against me, I'd say the time broke even in the end. Skinning we take initially in place of alchemy because money is a really big issue for warriors early on, and skinning offsets it, whereas if we took alchemy out the gate, we'd struggle not only for money but for bag space. Alchemy we swap for skinning at level 36 for a few reasons. Alchemy will enable warriors to solo Cyclonian using nature protection potions. It lets us complete many alchemy based quests that start popping up after level 40, and the buffs from alchemy help offset the gear dependence of warriors. And having healing potions lowers your risk of dying as a warrior. You can pull more recklessly and always have an oh shit button if you get unlucky parry or miss strings. Alchemy's stat benefits don't come at a cost as well, as long as you don't die. For example, if you level blacksmithing and you have a bracer with plus 5 strength, but you can craft a bracer with plus 8 strength, all you actually gain was 3 more strength. But with alchemy, if you can craft and use a plus 8 strength potion, it's not replacing anything, it's just straight up 8 more strength. And don't even get me started on how tanky these potions can make you, and immolation potions. You can become extremely powerful in dungeons and can AoE tank. I mean, look at this shit. Look at all those buffs. You can skip alchemy if you are not at a server launch, or you are leveling duo, or are playing a different class that favors other professions, but as a warrior on a fresh server, if you are solo, you should not leave home without it. The next question you might ask is, what if I'm not a warrior, or what if I'm not playing human? That is perfectly fine. This guide is easily followable as any other race or class combination. If you play a gnome or a dwarf, you can jump into the guide at level 12. If you are a night elf, you can jump into the guide at level 12. Just reverse the 12 to 14 part of the guide with the 14 to 16 part of the guide. Weave in your class quests in place of the warrior class quests, and don't do the warrior specific stuff. For example, at level 33 as a warrior, we hearth to South Shore after reaching Booty Bay for our whirlwind quest, but if you're not a warrior, you can just skip it and set your hearthstone to Booty Bay. Now let's go over the warrior specific stuff, talent builds. We respec twice in this guide. Starting out, we go Fury until level 30, and no, I do not use the sit macro in this guide. Fury is still better initially. The only really valuable thing you get from arms is anger management and tactical mastery early on, but you don't need tactical mastery pretty much at all pre-level 30 as you don't have berserker stance with intercept and its goodies, so you're just sitting in arms stance all day anyway. At level 30 though, we do swap to arms to get sweeping strikes and mainly anger management and tactical mastery, because at 30 we will get berserker stance and we will be stance dancing a lot for intercepting, pummeling, whirlwinding, disarming, etc. We'll also get the Whirlwind Axe, and we want all that juicy axe crit to go with Mortal Strike. However, at around level 50 in this guide, we will respec back to Fury. And you'll probably be saying, oh my god, Hakurai, two-handed arms are the best. While that is somewhat true, at launch, if you are leveling fast, you'll have a hard time finding a great two-handed weapon to keep two-handed arms relevant, as around level 50, Whirlwind Axe falls off, and there are nearly 0 good guaranteed quest rewards for Alliance players to replace it. Alterac Valley will not be out, and Executioner's Axe is a BoE world drop. The only option is to farm Gatorbite, and because it's a chance, I'd rather avoid putting it as part of the guide, and instead I opt for the guaranteed reward of Thrashblade. You can also take the Resurgence Rod as a quest reward instead of Thrashblade to keep leveling as two-handed arms or level as two-handed Slam Spec Fury. Each of the specs has its own pros and cons. I personally just prefer to go with Thrashblade and go dual wield for the rest of the leveling guide, as it feels more smooth for me, and Thrashblade is one of the best in slot Fury DPS swords when you're starting out at level 60. Dual wield leveling isn't ideal, but it isn't that bad, and Fury is more flexible than Arms because you won't be forced to specialize into a specific weapon type. Fury lets you swap to whatever weapon upgrade you get along the journey, and we're basically at the mercy of RNG after level 50 aside from Thrashblade. The reason Fury and Dual Wield are the better options for us in this guide is because Thrashblade is a guaranteed quest reward, it synchronizes well with the Fiery Blaze weapon enchantment that we get as a quest reward. We are human, so we have +5 to swords and maces. This helps with the mischance a little bit. And lastly, at around level 49, we can start applying Venomhide Poison to our dual wield weapons. It's a 9-hour poison buff to our weapons that synergizes better with dual wielding because of attack speeds. That puts a stacking debuff on our target. When both are fully stacked though, it's about a 30 DPS boost. It's not amazing, but it makes it so that dual wielding isn't that bad. And dual wield Fury is less prone to death from ads and such. Fury also isn't as good in PvP, but unless you're a hardcore PvPer, your spec really isn't going to matter that much anyway. During leveling, most of the world PvP involves people just attacking you while you're already fighting mobs, so unless you farm best in slot gear for each level bracket or have a pocket healer, your spec just isn't going to matter that much anyway. Everyone's just going to gank you all the time. So instead, I recommend you get a little notepad and you just write down the names of everyone who ganks you while you're leveling, and then once you get 60 and get some gear, you hunt their asses down and kill them relentlessly, and knowing this will be a big ass stress reliever for when a group of 4 horde chase you down in Tanaris for no goddamn reason. So, with all that out of the way, there's only one thing left to talk about: add-ons. For this guide, I am using Lazy Pig to turn in quests and pick up quests very, very quickly. I'm also using Swing Timer, an add-on that allows me to track my two-handed weapon Swing Timer. You may think this is too much effort, I'm tryharding, I don't want to play with the add-on. Just get it, your life's going to be way easier. It's not that hard to set up. You also want a mail add-on that's going to help you send mail quickly, because we are going to be mailing things to our alts, like herbs, so that they can hold on to them until we need to use them when we level alchemy. But aside from that, every other add-on is pretty much optional. So the last things we need to talk on are rested experience, grouping up, and dungeons. Rested experience is great. I tried to avoid using it in this guide and never logged out in an inn, but this guide was recorded over a 3-week period as I'm saving time off for the actual launch. If you have to work while you are leveling, try to always log out in a tavern. Think of an 8-hour workday in real life as like completing 2 to 3 quests in World of Warcraft. So those of you with real lives, don't get too discouraged. Your time played to 60 will ultimately be lower. Now this guide is built around leveling by yourself, but I know many of you want to play with friends or group up, and I encourage it, especially as a warrior where our kill speeds are not that fast, but we're great in parties. Classic World of Warcraft is a social game, so with that in mind, throughout this guide I will rate every quest we do on a 1 to 5 star scale. A 5-star quest is a quest that you should not do by yourself. It is impossible to solo for a warrior. I rate 5-star quests sparingly, and trust me, if I say it's 5 stars, it means I died many times trying different ways to solo it in my trial runs. A 4-star quest is soloable, but it's either very hard or the mobs are few and far between. Either reason means it's better to do this quest in a group if you can't. If you can't, then you'll need to put on your big boy pants. A 3-star quest is the sweet spot. It's basically a group or not quest. It really doesn't matter. You usually want a group if it's heavily contested, which is likely at the early stages of a game's launch. A 2-star quest is usually for a loot drop based quest. If you are playing with a friend, you can stick it out and do it, but there's no point in grouping up with strangers for it. It'll only slow you down. And a 1-star quest means it's a terrible drop rate loot quest. If you are in a party, skip it completely, or if it's even remotely contested, just skip it. Takes too long, not worth the time and trouble. If you follow the star rules, you should be able to navigate through the quests in a party. Just keep in mind that the guide has certain milestones for experience, and grouping up will put you a bit behind them, so if you group up, you'll need to offset it by grinding on some uncontested mobs. And the final note, we do end up doing dungeons in this leveling guide. Some are optional, but they give massive chunks of experience and help you stay out of the grind pool. For warriors, they give very big quality of life gear improvements, so while I don't recommend skipping them, you can, especially the less gear dependent classes like hunters or warlocks. But warriors can tank, which is generally the hardest role in a dungeon group to fill, so I don't think you'll have any trouble finding dungeon groups unless you completely no-life it. In that case, you'll just have to offset the lost experience with grinding and endure the leveling process that comes with bad gear. We do each of the dungeons in this guide in a state where we over-level the dungeon, so this gives more opportunity for you to find lower level players that are on the lower end of that dungeon's level bracket to join your party. And as long as you as the tank are strong enough to take the hits, you can pretty much carry every dungeon run and make it go off without a hitch. As I'll be walking you through each dungeon step by step, over detailing even the most simple dungeon mechanics, including easy mode dungeons like Dead Mines, to guarantee a wipeless experience. You can prepare yourself beforehand knowing that the dungeons we will do in this guide are Dead Mines, Stockades, the early half of Uldaman as all of the quests are front loaded in that dungeon, then Zul'Farrak, Mauradon full clear, and then a Sunken Temple run, where Sunken Temple and Zul'Farrak are the most ignorable of the bunch. But for Zul'Farrak, it's really short, it's like 45 minutes to get 6 quests done, and it's possible gear upgrades, so it's really silly to skip it. The only 2 super needed dungeons here are Dead Mines and Mauradons, which we do for gear. So with all that out of the way, I think we're ready to start with the leveling guide. So let's jump into part 1 of my Alliance 1 to 60 leveling guide. Boop.